Welcome you all to our REL Fall Distinguished Lecture Series 2020, jointly organized by the Department of Religious Study and the Religious Graduate Council, University of West. And my name is Emeritus Sakya, and Chair of Department of Religious Study. And today I'm honored to have the privilege to introduce our distinguished guest speaker, Professor Louis Lancaster. As you know, Dr. Lancaster does not need any introduction. He's a legend in the field of the Buddhist studies. And Dr. Lancaster is Emeritus Professor of the Department of East Asian Language at the University of California, Berkeley, and he taught there for 33 years. In 1991, he helped with the early formation of the University of West and served as a president of the University of West from 2004 to 2006. And he has continued to teach and support the university. And he was the first student complete the PhD in Buddhist studies at the University of Wisconsin. And his dissertation is on the Chinese translation of the 8,000 line Perfection of Wisdom Sutra. Professor Lancaster has published over 75 articles, reviewed, and has edited or authored numerous books, including Pragya-Paramita and Related System, Buddhist Scripture, Early Chan in China and Tibet, and Assimilation of Buddhism in Korea, and the Korean Buddhist Canon, a descriptive catalog, which continues to serve as an important tool for research into the Buddhist canon. And he also got a grant from the National Geographic Society, and he and a group of students and faculty inventoried text in monasteries among Sherpa people in the Himalayas. He then began to research the problem of converting Buddhist texts from Pali and Chinese into computer format, so which resulted in major CD-ROM database. He also founded the Electronic Culture Atlas to use the computer-based technology to map the spread of Buddhism from the remote past to the present. He's very active in research. He has ongoing projects such as Ikai and Atlas of Maritime Buddhism and software development for use with canonic texts. And he was awarded the 2014 Grand Award from the Korean Buddhist Order for his contribution to Buddhism. So beyond the scholarly efforts, he has done prison visitations and teaching for more than 20 years. So he is truly an inspiration for everyone. So today, the topic of today's lecture is our 21st century world, viewing through Buddhist lens. Without further ado, so please join me in welcoming Professor Lancaster.
And can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, Professor.
Well, I want to thank the University of the West for inviting me to give this lecture, and especially recognizing President Ta, Venerable Sirananda, along with Professor Miro Shakya, who have done the organizing. Thanks to all of you. I do appreciate it in this time where technology is dominant and we see each other through this medium. Well, it's a daunting task to try to comprehend what's happening in our world, much less give guidance for how to deal with the staggering events that seem so overwhelming. James Baldwin reminds us that history is not past, it is the present. We're in the midst of history making at this very moment. The coronavirus not only affects human bodies, it has infected our economies, our production of goods, education, because of COVID, October 2019, remember that? Last year, just before the outbreak, has very little resemblance to October 2020.
There's 129 people.
Studies that were published in prior years about the future seem to be about some unrelated world, not the one that we're seeing every day.
Guys, then I can.
We have little idea of what October 2021, a year from now, will be like. Will it be more like October 2019 or 2018 than it is to our present October 2020? In many ways, we can understand October 2000 better than this day, October 2020. The pandemic that is overwhelming the world came at a time when we already had major issues in human life. Inequality, where less than 10% of the population had over 90% of the world's wealth. Migration of millions of people from underdeveloped economies were on the move into wealthier regions. Population was growing rapidly, adding over 1.5 billion in 3 decades. Life expectancy averages increased from 65 to 70 just in this new century. And people like myself, over 60 years of age, doubled from the number in 1990. But population increase was not universal. The birth rate of North America, Europe, and Japan is not sufficient to maintain current numbers of citizenry. At the same time, large-scale growth in sub-Saharan Africa and Western Eurasia births are shifting population density. And even in the face of lower birth rates in some regions, the overall number of humans on our planet continues to increase at a rapid rate. Well, this is not the first time that humans have faced such disruptions of normal life. As a child, I listened to stories about the issues of a pandemic. My mother, in her late teen years, was in training to become a nurse in 1918, when the last major pandemic occurred, the flu, that is estimated to have killed 50 million people. Her children, including myself, remember how she insisted on lots of hand washing and not touching our eyes. All this was seen by us to be inconveniences and unnecessary. Only now we have experienced a similar outbreak to what she experienced. And we understand her concern for the first time. I think all of her children wish she was still alive so we could apologize to her for being so resistant to her wise advice. In 1947, Albert Camus wrote a fictional account titled Plague. of an epidemic in a mythical Algerian town that eventually killed all the inhabitants because the population was too slow to change their habits of living. People could identify with that message because they had just suffered in 1947 through a Second World War that had killed millions and leveled many of the great cities. Just as we still try to comprehend the destruction of World War II and continue to ask the question of what went wrong that society could be so self-destructive, so too will people look back to this present time. They are going to judge us. They're going to ask the question, who handled the crisis in the best way? They may well ask questions of, what did Buddhists do during this moment in history? So, does Buddhism have teachings that can be relevant to our extraordinary history of today? I believe it does. In many ways, the pandemic has probably already changed the course of human history. And it reminds me of the story told about the young Siddhartha when he took his journey into the world and saw 4 striking examples of life. Just as we today are being forced to acknowledge illness, especially among elderly people, with subsequent death for many, so Siddhartha saw a person suffering from disease, old people bent with age and weakness, and the most disturbing of all, a corpse surrounded by mourners. It has often been said that this is just a metaphor for the stages of life. But in our present experience, illness, old age, and death are immediate realities, suddenly affecting global human population in unprecedented fashion. At first, Siddhartha, riding through the crowded city streets, was certain that what he witnessed happened to others, not to him or his family. And like the people in Camus' novel, was resistant to a full acceptance of the world before him and its implications. Well, fortunately, he was not alone in the chariot. His driver had to give him help, and over repeated the news that what he was witnessing was the destiny of all humans. It was shattering to the youth to realize the unexpected and the unwanted knowledge of reality. Well, as you can see, I am now an old man. And like it or not, I experience the weakness of aging. And now I have to face up to the fact that surviving COVID would be a slim possibility for me. 3 of my extended family members have died. No longer a metaphor. The 3 great messengers of illness, old age, and death lurk as shadows. Well, let me not be too grim. I've had a very full life, and many of you who are listening to this lecture have helped to make it so. The three great messengers are, in fact, wonderful teachers, and they keep us from such destructive behavior as arrogance and feeling entitled to have exactly what we want and demand. They show us that we are all brothers and sisters in this life. And what we share can be far greater than our differences. It is the ultimate intimacy. It's the ultimate intimacy to share illness, old age, and death with every living being, every human contact. Now, there was a fourth sighting for Siddhartha. In the passing dramas of the three great messengers, there was an observer and a participant. A person stood in calm demeanor, seemingly unaffected by all the aspects of life that were so disturbing to the youth. Seeing this amazing stillness in the posture of the person, Siddhartha was told that this lone figure was one who saw it all and had, through practice and inner development, reached a level of calm acceptance of life's experiences. It was crucial to give the full scope of reality to the young prince, to assure him that while there is suffering, there is also hope, that we can learn to deal with it. We are provided with the ability to know and fully comprehend the nature of life and all its changes and suffering. And at the same time, we can have the experience of inner peace. How is it possible to see these realities and inevitable stages of discomfort and even death, and just stand by in calm repose? Perhaps the greatest lesson that Siddhartha had to learn was that calm acceptance of realities of existence is not indifference. Some of you have heard, I had this issue driven home to me while doing a prison visit. My story for the prisoners was about the way in which I set about trying to deal with long delays in traffic on freeways. Not a daily issue for my audience, but of great interest to me. Nonetheless, I describe my thoughts and my actions and my attempt to practice what I often taught. The 6 perfections of wisdom include patience, or perhaps better translated, calm acceptance. So when I was in a mass of cars, stopped and creeping along, making me anxious about being late for my class, I practiced being aware of my breathing, and I was able to calm down and to manage my anxiety and near anger about the traffic. But as I was soon to see, my smugness about having calmed myself and reaching some degree of acceptance of the situation was in fact far from wisdom and perfection. One of the prisoners raised his hand at the end of the description of my successful mastery of impatience on the freeway and asked me, "Professor, when you're sitting in your car on the freeway with calm acceptance of the problem, do you at the same time have a sense of compassion for all the other people in those cars around you who are anxious and worried about being late?" I felt as if he had nailed me to the wall. It took away my breath. For a moment or two, I was silenced, and I had to admit to him and the audience, no, I was not giving them any thought. After the class, I asked him how he was so insightful that he had spotted this gaping flaw in my action. He said that he had been in prison for 18 years and slept every night in a large room with 200 inmates. And it was torment for him to have the lights on all night, to hear his fellow inmates snoring, sometimes shouting out in a bad dream, grinding their teeth in tension while asleep, moaning, and sometimes weeping. One night, after he had been meditating for some years, he suddenly was overcome with a feeling of deep compassion for everyone in that room. He realized they were like him. They were all suffering from the noise and the environment. And in that moment, he forgave them and decided to try his best to help them when he could. So he said to me, "Professor, you had a traffic jam of cars. I had a traffic jam of people." What a teacher. What a teacher. A person in prison, perhaps for his whole life, bereft of any possessions, no family contacts for more than a decade, but one who could access both calm acceptance and compassionate empathy for those in his life. When Siddhartha saw the calmness of the fourth sighting, it was not an indication of indifference. He was seeing compassion in action. Several of the other prisoners that day said that they had been attracted to the meditation classes with Buddhist visitors because they saw my questioner sitting on his bed day after day in calmness. So finally, one by one, they approached the meditator and asked what he was doing. Having the presence of a calm and contented person in their midst turned out in itself to be compassion in action, just like the person seen by Siddhartha. My questioner taught by example. We're faced with unparalleled changes in our world. And people are reacting in many different ways. There's a need for these centered and aware persons to provide the introduction to a way of life that can bring some peace and happiness to our awareness. Our new century is marked by stress and alienation in the social fabric. The nation is split into divisions that separate the citizens of our country, and it is reflected in broken relationships between neighbors, friends, and family. Differences have hardened into immovable positions where neither side is able to make meaningful contact with the other. So what does the teaching and practice of Buddhism have to offer in such a stalemate that is marked by anger or even, sadly, at times by violence? When each side shouts across the divide with disdain that can reach to the height of hatred, how can any of them help the other? No one really listens to the shouts and attack. Rather, we find ourselves hurling back similar taunts and insults. Buddhism has had a long history of debates, dialogues, where each side puts forward their own position. These debate dialogues can go on for centuries before any solution or resolution is achieved. The difference to our present day rhetoric is that there has been dialogue, communication with the other side in the Buddhist tradition. When Chinese pilgrims first went to India, they were amazed to find that monasteries were open for practitioners from multiple schools to live together in harmony. The tolerance of difference in belief and practice, like the calm acceptance of life's travail, teaches just by example. When there are large international gatherings of Buddhists, one is moved by the fact that Buddhists from any region, any school, any monastic clothing, any gender, mingle freely. How can significant differences be just ignored? And why can the participants greet one another with acceptance? I don't mean to imply that Buddhism has no issues or that it is a perfect institution. However, for the main, it has managed to have distinctly different practices and beliefs without waging war or resorting to killing those who are not part of one's own tradition. Our great divide in the US at this moment is created in part by the lack of compassion for the life and problems of the other side. If people are violent, there's a reason for such behavior. It's easy to condemn the acts, but much harder to understand what is at the root of the problems. Again, it is the prison visits that have opened up for me a view and some understanding of a whole subculture dominated by issues that I have been spared from in my own life. There can be little dialogue. if the two sides have no knowledge of the hurts and pains of the other, what can be said about people we find obnoxious and destructive? If we knew the full story of their lives, would we have more understanding and tolerance? If we knew the fears that torment others, would we comprehend how they can have no way to give aid to those they fear? If we knew the worries about daily livelihood of others, would we be able to have empathy for their focus on money and inability to be generous? Our present century, with its turmoil and wildly shifting changes that affect how we gather in groups, how we do business, how we carry on with living life, reminds me of the story in the Lotus Sutra. There we're told of a great mansion with a family of children playing with many toys and games. The father approaches the house and sees that it is on fire. His children are in immediate danger. He shouts out to them to get them out of the house because it's on fire. However, they don't recognize what he means by danger, and they're fully engrossed with their play, and they don't respond. He finally has to get their attention by promising them something far greater than any of their toys, carts drawn by various animals. Well, they certainly want to see this, and finally leave the house. But there are no chariots awaiting them. Instead, the father says that there's something even better, a larger chariot that they can all ride in together. At this moment in California, the story of burning houses and flames is more than a metaphor. We're now experiencing every fall a world of flames and smoke. And schools have begun to set aside the potential schedule for smoke days, much like in colder climates, there are snow days when attendance is not possible. Our world is heating, and we're a bit like those children. We still want our toys and our enjoyments, and we don't pay much attention to it. What would the father of the Lotus Sutra have to offer to us to get our attention today? What is offered to us that is so appealing that we would be willing to change our habits and way of life? Is survival sufficient reward for action? The story of the burning house is one way of saying we must be aware of what's happening around us. Instead of just being limited to calm acceptance, the father in the story saves the children by entering into their lives and understanding what they prize. Some would say he lied to them in order to get them out of the burning house. Does it take lies to get the attention of people? Must we make extravagant promises to move people to action? Buddhists are telling us that in order to teach and lead people in directions that will be productive and safe, one needs teaching skills. It is not enough merely to state something without appealing to the interest of the hearer. There is at this moment the need to get the attention of people, to offer them something that is so prized that they will be led to change their behavior. In Camus' novel, no one could put forth an appeal that moved the citizens of that North African town, and they all perished. I think we're in a burning house, and voices are calling to us to change. But the big question is, what reward is being offered that has enough appeal to sway most of us? Right now, with the COVID generating restrictions, the voice that seems closest to our heart is the one that says, if you change behavior, we can return to our former lifestyle. But like the children of the Lotus Sutra, if and when we do manage to control the virus, will the result be what we expected? Our world has changed, and it will never be the same. I think we must understand that our future will never be like our past. But the father in the story says to his children who are disappointed not to see small animal drum carts, don't be cast down by the lack of what you wanted. You can have something that is greater. I think we're going to be challenged in the future when we recognize that the past is lost forever. I can imagine the Father standing before us as we face the reality of this change. He could say to us, the past was not all wonderful, not all happiness, not all compassionate, not all wise, not all tolerant, not all healthy, not all sustainable. You should set higher goals than what was achieved in the past. Well, if the Buddhist teachings from this story have something to say in our time of crisis, it is achieve a higher degree of awareness, a recognition of the need to have stronger communities that provide support for all of their members. Be mature in your way of living and be open to the possibilities that come from changes. Our campus will be part of this new future. The founder, Master Xing Yun, has for his whole teaching career urged his followers to be successful, be builders of strong families, be generous in spirit. He reminds us that there is enough. There is enough resources, enough ideas, enough support for the task that lies before us as we seek to rebuild a new world, a new economy, a new educational system, a new community based on calm acceptance of the nature of our lives and compassionate action for everyone who shares it with us. The reality of illness, old age, and death. It's natural to grieve for what has been lost. But once we calmly accept that reality, there is enough. There is enough for us to forge ahead as we learn to live with and embrace life with all its changes. So thank you very much. I think that there is a time when we can have some questions.
Thank you, Dr. Lancaster. Thank you so much for offering such a wonderful and touching lecture.